This is Professor Gavor, and for the last chapter in week 2, we're covering chapter 7, creating IT shared services. Now, IT and ERP systems are especially important in creating a shared service organization of any type. And hopefully, I'll provide some other readings and perhaps another video lecture on the idea of shared services in the business side. And you can't do it without a good ERP system. So, what is a shared service? Allow me to read. It's a collaborative strategy in which a subset of existing business functions are concentrated into a new semi-autonomous business unit. This that has a management structure designed to promote efficiency, value generation, cost savings, improve service for the internal customer of the parent corporation, like a business competing in the open market. Okay, that's a good way to look at it. The examples that I know about are in the supply chain. You could have a central planning organization. You could have central customer service, which is basically order processing and management organization. Let's think of North America and South America for a CPG company, and this is actually a real case. They might have had 10 people doing customer service for the US company. And this company was separated into geographical areas. Canada and each country basically had its own was its own subsidiary that had its own sales and order fulfillment. And oftentimes they even had manufacturing. Manufacturing is not relevant to this example. Canada maybe had 4 people working in customer service. US company probably had, 10, 15 people. Mexico probably had 10 people. Central America, 1 in each of the 5 different countries. Maybe 2 in Guatemala being the headquarters, or 3 in Guatemala. Then Venezuela, 2 to 3. Colombia, 3 to 4. All the other, Brazil probably had another 8 or 10. Argentina probably had 3, 4. Chile had 2, 3. Peru, Ecuador, a couple, 2, 3 each. So if you add it all up, they probably had about 40, 50 people working in customer service through the entire Americas region. With an ERP system like SAP or Oracle, and getting the system to do the bulk of the work. In other words, the bulk of the transactions. These are sales that are being processed before they're being released to the distribution center for picking and distribution. So this is just the order processing part. If you can get the ERP system to do that more effectively, in other words, more sales orders go through the system not needing to be intervened, not needing human attention in that intervention, the less people you need to do this. And guess what? With the Internet of Things and the ability to have one group sitting in a remote location, and you could do it for all of the Americas. So they moved all customer service to Mexico or to Costa Rica. And where they had 50 people doing it, maybe now they have 10 for the whole region. That's a tremendous savings. If it's $50,000 a person, they say 40 times 50, that's $2 million savings. That's quite a bit. So, I hope I did the math right on that $2 million. In fact, I should look at my calculator and make sure I did that right. I just did it off the top of my head. Not a safe bet all the time. Yeah, 2 million. Okay, so a shared service organization, it involves more than just centralization or consolidation of similar activities into one location. It took 10 years after that company implemented their ERP system, which in this case was SAP, before they were able to take advantage and get their order patterns at such a rate where they were really using the system to its fullest effectiveness that allowed them to do this. They also consolidated their planning, and by planning I mean manufacturing and production planning and inventory planning centrally as well, and reduce the same number of people there. So it must embrace a customer orientation. You need sufficient management discretion, and autonomy must exist. And the point they're missing is the ERP system has to really have fulfilled its potential that you're now able to do this. And so the way I look at it, every transaction that goes through an ERP system that requires human intervention has to be viewed as a quality defect. So you're trying to improve the quality of these business processes. Every time a human being has to treat an order or some planning or inventory or whatever the case may be as an exception and required to go in and intervene in the order and fix something, has to be viewed as a defect. So what's the promise of shared service? Reduce costs and improve services. You reduce the number of people you need to do the job because the system is doing the bulk of that heavy lifting. Reduce distractions from core activities. Well, you could reallocate those folks that were doing customer service to do other things. But let's be honest, most companies are looking to shed headcount where they can, so it's not about reallocation generally. And if you're doing this in several different organizations, you're not going to be able to reallocate all those people. You frankly don't need them anymore, so you reduce headcount. You potentially create an externally focused profit center, depending on what it is you've created a shared service for. The same thing can be done for finance. The same thing can be done for IT support. So the pros of IT shared services. Now, if we're sharing services just for IT, we're talking about increased efficiencies, decreased personnel requirements, improved economies of scale, professionalism, uniformity of service, personal development, and control. If your system works very well and you have a centralized system, you don't need IT people in every geographic location. You might need some IT support. You might need people that, oh, my laptop doesn't work. Oops, my password doesn't work. I can't connect to the internet, blah, 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 blah. You can even outsource that to a third-party organization if you want. So generally, I would think those kinds of IT support organizations, that handle individuals' desktop and laptops, has probably reduced because of this. If I have one ERP system in the entire globe for a multinational company, like the CPG companies I talk about, or an automotive company like Ford or GM, Toyota, you have one central group that's probably charged with tending to that ERP system and managing it, and you probably have subgroups that are responsible for larger chunks. If I have an IT person reporting to my organization, he has a small staff centrally that probably is focused only on the supply chain aspects of it, or the finance aspects of it, or the distribution, whatever the case may be, the personnel aspects of it. So you can do a lot more with having one computer system. In the old days, when every geographical company had a lot more autonomy and was able to pick its own general ledger system or its own MRP, materials resource planning, which was a precursor of ERP systems in supply chains, people picked and chose their own. They chose a local vendor. They wrote it themselves. They did all kinds of things. And you had to have IT people tending to all those. If you get to one IT system and get it to run very, very well and fulfill its its full potential, the reason you invested in it, then you need less people to tend it. The same thing applies in a factory. It's not necessarily a shared service organization, but I remember, as an example, walking through um, a toothbrush handle injection molding operation. And there was probably 10 injection molding machines in there, which could, spit out, I don't know, thousands of toothbrush handles in a day. Um, there was one person tending each machine. As the machines have gotten more sophisticated and a lot more programming in the system, if you walk through today, you might see 2 people tending those 10 machines. So it's that kind of efficiency applied to the implementation of an ERP system. The cons? Well, the shared service, from the point of view of a shared service unit, they could become a disruption to the service flow. I don't think that happens very much because companies are running marvelously looking at a global trend. There was an article that we passed around, as a matter of fact, in 5411, Quantitative Methods for Managers, that I also teach, that talks about the reason we haven't had a global recession since the Great Recession was these ERP systems and the shared service, not just the ERP system, but the shared service organization, that you had one entity in many companies looking at their entire inventory management. And if inventory was building up too much, they were able to scale back production here and there as needed to avoid the massive buildup of inventory that often causes a recession, because if you have too much inventory, you start laying off factory workers. Factory workers then tighten their belts and don't consume, and it ripples through the rest of the economy while you're waiting to bring that inventory down and everything to settle out and start up again. So the idea of a shared service, I don't see the cons that much. So moving work to a central location can thereby creating wasteful handoffs, rework, and or duplication. It eliminates that. Instilling an us versus them mentality. There's no them anymore and us, because you've eliminated all the local us's. And there's only one entity that takes care of the world. And if they can do it efficiently and effectively, why is there any complaint from anybody? So I think this might be a little old. Maybe they're seeing things that I haven't seen. And I have to believe that every implementation of a shared service organization probably has not gone flawlessly. If you try it too prematurely before your ERP system is fully matured and operating on all cylinders, as they say, well, I think these things could happen. So it's predicated on the effective realization of the promise of the ERP system. The other cons: additional costs associated with bureaucracy. There's less bureaucracy, the way I look at it. Loss of control experienced by independent business units. That is a huge issue. General managers, where they used to be the king of everything in their geographical area, this country manager model, where it was an independent P&L center that was that basically controlled everything within the borders of that country. Well, that's gone with globalization in many CPG companies, for example, and probably many auto companies. So when they lose that control, they've also lost some stature. They've also lost probably the kind of money they were making, because their responsibilities are less, even though that doesn't happen instantaneously. That happens over time. And probably as you switch out, a general manager retires or moves to another position, the replacement general manager probably comes in at a lesser pay because the job is less than it used to be. And an increased communication burden. Well, guess what? In this world where everything is connected, that's what makes it work, is the ability to communicate and execute across the world. I would say extraordinary one-time startup costs. Well, if it if you had to implement SAP or Oracle at the CPG company I'm talking about, and it was millions of dollars of investment to do that, and it took you 10 years of maturity to get to the point where you could actually effectively implement a shared service organization, that's an extraordinary one-time startup cost. But boy, oh boy, once you get able to do that, you start duplicating it in finance. You could start duplicating it in HR and benefit support. You could start doing it certainly in supply chain, 2 or 3 areas of supply chain: procurement, planning, materials resource planning, and customer service. It's I think it has tremendous benefit, and of course IT. So IT shared services, key organizational success factors. The push for IT services can come from IT or the business. The motivation for the business are becoming globally integrated enterprise. That's the whole point of an ERP in a global company. You have one basically ginormous shared database. It's probably all in different mini databases, but theoretically they're all connected. You could outsource your non-core activities, like you could outsource local IT support, which is basically PC and printer and local area networks and all of that kind of stuff and Wi-Fi to a third party, or you could hire a couple people to do it yourself, and it's a nice entry level position for some people. Motivations from IT: cost savings and control. They drive agility, the ability to, you make one change in a centralized location and it goes everywhere. You create a rationalized and simplified application portfolio that, if everybody's using SAP and here's the various bells and whistles that we've attached to it, a local subsidiary can't add their own bell or whistle without going through the centralized IT project planning and budget allocation process. They have to justify it, it has to pay, and it has to have global applicability in order for it to be considered. So here, the differences between the business vision for shared services and the IT vision have to be aligned, or it's a recipe for disaster. And we've been talking about that. IT and business have to be the same. And I either love or hate diagrams like this. So you have multi-tenant business services. So you have your various business units. And you probably only want to have one security management for the whole company. You don't need it at every business unit location. But you might have it in 2 locations. And you have usage management, network management, server management, storage management. SLA. I probably got to look that up. I should have looked it up before I started the lecture. I'll let you look at it. Okay. So if you're creating effective IT shared services, transparent process for goal alignment. The process should produce sufficient economy of scale or resources to enable enhanced quality of services. If you're going to centralize it, you could provide better services faster with less people. Recommendations: a comprehensive investment model. I think the investment model I've been showing is requires sophistication, understanding, and a commitment from the business as well as IT to make it work. My model that I've been talking about in almost every one of these little lectures is it's almost got to shadow the capital budgeting process. And then you execute. So the shared services model, it's quotes, I will quote. Shared services model is a viable option when the savings from reduction in staffing are greater than the added overhead of creating a management structure to run the shared business unit. Yes, that's absolutely true. But the reduction in staffing, I don't know how much extra overhead you're creating, because if you have those people doing those jobs in various geographical locations, you had so many people, you had overhead in all of those locations. So if you've reduced the number of people, I've got to believe the amount of overhead has gone down. You've already invested in the IT system. You've already invested in the ERP system. That's a sunk cost. And this is part of, in fact, even when ERP systems were sold in the 90s and early 2000s, I think this was but a little gleam in people's eyes, a shared service organization. I didn't think, the projects I was involved in, I didn't think that this was something we would be looking at. But I knew that we had to improve the transaction sets to have the system do more of transactions and less human intervention. I just didn't leap to the next step myself. Other people saw that vision, but it wasn't clear to everyone at the beginning, yours truly included. You have to redraft the relationship with the business. Well, if you go to a shared service organization, policy is almost set by that shared service organization more so than the local business units. So customer service orientation must therefore be instilled. If your job is to do customer service or to do the planning, you've got to do it very well or everybody will complain, especially when you first turn it on and you first implement it, because they used to have control of it locally and now they don't. So you cannot do it, and I can't stress that enough, until your ERP system is functioning at a very high level. Shared services models must build internal sales and marketing competencies, which require resources focused on communicating with current and prospective customers. Most of the time, I'm talking about internal customers. Costa Rica, low labor market, high education market. In the Americas, there's probably more shared service organizations there for South America, for sure, and the Americas also, because they even operate in free zones where they don't pay local taxes, but provide local employment. So, in conclusion, the shared service model for IT arises from a desire in the business for more customer-centric and responsive IT organization, or a more centralized, higher output, higher effective, lower cost, responsive IT organization. You can do all that if you do it properly. So shared services model can satisfy the IT and business goals, but there are challenges during the development and implementations of this. It's got to be done properly. And as I've mentioned before, the key factor is make sure your ERP system is already operating at a high rate of effectiveness. Thank you very much. Talk to you in Chapter 8.